In the summer of 1402, beneath a sun that scorched the plains of Anatolia like a celestial furnace, the Ottoman Empire marched toward its destiny. 85,000 men advanced exhausted, parched, dragging armor that weighed like sins under the July heat. They had endured 8 days of forced marches, 8 days without rest, and before them, on the plain of Chubuk, something awaited that was not an army. It was a nightmare carved in steel and blood. But what they found was not battle, it was extermination. When the lines collided, the sky darkened with arrows. Thousands fell before they could draw their swords. War elephants advanced like living mountains, crushing entire formations beneath their feet. Horses screamed, standards sank into the dust. And then the unthinkable. Ottoman soldiers themselves began switching sides, abandoning their sultan in the midst of chaos. The line broke. The center collapsed. The thunder of 85,000 men became silence and ash. When the sun set over Ankara, an empire lay shattered, and the man who had forged it, Sultan Bayezid, nicknamed the Thunderbolt, was dragged before his conqueror like a chained dog. The man who had made Europe tremble would become the footstool of a monster. What happened that day did not merely change the destiny of an empire, it changed the map of the world. To understand the magnitude of that catastrophe, one must look back a few years, to the moment when two colossi began walking toward each other without knowing it. At the end of the 14th century, the known world was dominated by two forces that seemed unstoppable: the Ottoman Empire in the west and the Timurid Empire in the east. Both born of the steppes, both forged in blood, both convinced that destiny had promised them the entire world. The Ottoman Empire had grown with astonishing speed. In barely a century, it had transformed from a small emirate in Anatolia into the power that directly threatened Constantinople, the city that had resisted for 1,000 years. Its sultan, Bayezid I, was known as Yildirim, the Thunderbolt. The nickname was no empty metaphor. It was precise description. Bayezid attacked with a speed that left his enemies paralyzed. In 1396, he had crushed a European crusader army at Nicopolis, a victory so complete that the kings of Europe trembled upon hearing his name. Now he besieged Constantinople, convinced that soon the city of emperors would be his. But from the east, another shadow was spreading. Timur, known in the west as Tamerlane the Lame, had built an empire even vaster and far bloodier. Born in Uzbekistan, self-proclaimed descendant of Genghis Khan, Timur had conquered Persia, ravaged Delhi, sacked Baghdad, devastated Damascus. His campaigns had left a trail of destruction without precedent. It is said that his armies killed 17 million people, 5% of the world's population at that time. Where other conquerors demanded tribute, Timur demanded absolute submission. And where he found resistance, he left pyramids of skulls as warning. The tensions between both empires had grown over years. Bayezid had given refuge to princes who had fled from Timur. Timur had welcomed Anatolian emirs dispossessed by the Ottomans. Letters loaded with insults crossed the borders. Bayezid mocked Timur's lameness. Timur threatened to make Bayezid's wives slaves of his harem. They were two predators circling each other, waiting for the moment to strike. That moment arrived in 1400. Timur invaded Ottoman territory and captured the city of Sivas in eastern Anatolia. He buried alive 4,000 Armenian soldiers who had defended the city. The message was clear: war had begun. Bayezid received the news while tightening the siege around Constantinople. He was about to achieve what no conqueror had accomplished in 1,000 years, taking the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. But the threat from Timur was too great to ignore. With contained fury, the Thunderbolt abandoned the siege and marched east to face the Lame. It was the summer of 1402. The stage was set for one of the most devastating clashes in history. What made Timur so fearsome was not merely his cruelty, but his military genius. At 66 years of age, after 4 decades of uninterrupted campaigns, he dominated the art of war like few men in history. His army numbered approximately 140,000 soldiers, mostly light and heavy cavalry, veterans of battles from China to Russia. Additionally, he brought 32 war elephants from India, beasts that had never been seen in Anatolia and whose mere presence could break the morale of any army. But Timur did not rely solely on brute force. He was a master of maneuver, of deception, of turning the terrain itself into a deadly weapon. While Bayezid marched eastward searching for him, Timur executed one of the most audacious maneuvers in military history. Instead of confronting the Ottomans head-on, he ordered his army to swing in a wide arc to the southwest, moving at an impossible speed for a force of that size. In 6 days of forced marches, 140,000 men crossed Anatolia and appeared behind the Ottoman army. When Bayezid arrived at the place where he expected to find Timur, there was no one. Only scorched earth, poisoned springs, devastated fields, and then messengers arrived with news that froze his blood. Timur was at Ankara, in his rear, between him and the heart of his empire. Bayezid had no choice. He ordered his army to turn around and march back toward Ankara at full speed. 8 days. 8 days of scorching heat, with the July sun turning armor into ovens. 8 days without enough water, without enough rest, without enough hope. Meanwhile, Timur settled comfortably into the camp, abandoned by the Ottomans. He used their tents, drank their water, fed his horses with their fodder. And while he waited, he prepared the battlefield with the precision of a surgeon preparing an operation. He ordered his engineers to dam the Chubuk stream, the only significant water source on the plain. He dug trenches and reinforced them with wooden stakes. He distributed his troops in defensive formations, with cavalry on the flanks and war elephants in the center. And he waited. Bayezid arrived at the outskirts of Ankara on July 27th, 1402. His men were devastated. 85,000 soldiers who could barely stand on their feet. The horses trembled with exhaustion, the men's lips were cracked from thirst. And before them, in perfect formation, Timur's army gleamed under the sun like a serpent of steel, rested and fed. Bayezid's generals begged him to wait, to rest the troops, to take defensive positions in the nearby mountains and force Timur to attack on unfavorable terrain. It was sensible advice. It was correct advice. Bayezid rejected it. The Thunderbolt did not wait. The Thunderbolt attacked. That impulsiveness had carried him to victory time and again. That same impulsiveness would now lead him to ruin. That night, while his men tried to sleep with their throats burning from thirst, Bayezid organized his formation. He placed his son Suleiman in command of the left wing with the best troops. The right wing fell under the command of Serbian Prince Stefan Lazarevic, the Sultan's brother-in-law, with his heavy Balkan cavalry. Bayezid himself took the center with the Janissaries, the elite of the Ottoman army, the most disciplined and lethal soldiers in the Islamic world. His son Mehmed commanded the reserve, but there was a fatal flaw in that formation. A quarter of Bayezid's army was composed of soldiers from the Anatolian Emirates he had conquered in recent years, Tatars and Turkomans who had been forced to serve under the Ottoman standard, men who felt no loyalty to the Thunderbolt, men who saw in Timur a liberator, not an enemy. On July 28, 1402, shortly before dawn, Timur ordered the drums to sound. A deep thunder that rolled across the plain and awakened the Ottomans from their restless sleep. The sound was deliberate, calculated to sow terror in already exhausted men. For long minutes the drums continued, a death beat that resonated in every soldier's chest. Then silence. And then the battle. At approximately 10 in the morning, Miran Shah, Timur's son, launched the first attack against the Ottoman left wing. A rain of arrows fell upon Suleiman's troops, so dense that it darkened the sky for moments. The Ottomans raised shields, but the arrows of the Mongol archers pierced wood and leather with lethal ease. Bayezid then committed his first fatal error. He ordered the Tatar cavalry he had recently conquered to advance and absorb the initial impact. He expected them to serve as a human shield while his best troops prepared for the counterattack. What he did not expect was what happened next. In the midst of chaos, the Tatars began to desert. First there were dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. They abandoned their positions and rode directly toward Timur's lines, where they were welcomed as brothers. The soldiers from the Anatolian Emirates followed their example. Men who had sworn loyalty to Bayezid only months before now turned their swords against him. Within an hour, the Ottoman army lost a quarter of its strength, not from battle, from betrayal. Stefan Lazarevich and his Serbian knights fought with desperate ferocity on the right wing. They wore heavy black plate armor that proved nearly impervious to Mongol arrows. 3 times they charged against Timur's lines. 3 times they cut through enemy formations like an iron lance. Timur, observing the battle from a nearby hill, was impressed. They say he murmured that those men fought like lions. Each time Stefan managed to open a breach, he begged Bayezid to escape with him. The path was open. They could break through the encirclement. They could survive to fight another day. Bayezid refused. The Thunderbolt did not flee. The Thunderbolt did not surrender. The Thunderbolt would die where he stood if necessary. In the center, the Janissaries held their position with superhuman discipline. Surrounded on all sides, without water, without hope of reinforcements, they continued fighting. They formed impenetrable defensive squares, their spears pointing outward like the spines of an iron hedgehog. Timur launched wave after wave against them. All failed, but time was not on the Ottomans' side. As the sun advanced and the heat became unbearable, more and more soldiers fell not from enemy swords, but from exhaustion and thirst. Horses collapsed, men fainted inside their armor, and the desertions continued. By noon, the Ottoman left wing had completely collapsed. Soldiers fled in all directions, pursued by Timurid cavalry that hunted them like wolves hunting deer. Prince Suleiman managed to escape westward, eventually reaching a Genoese ship that carried him to Europe. He took with him part of the Ottoman treasury. The right wing under Stefan Lazarevich finally had to retreat when the situation became untenable. The Serbians had fought with extraordinary honor, but they could not win a battle that was already lost. Stefan managed to rescue one of Bayezid's sons and part of the remaining treasury, fighting his way toward Constantinople through the chaos. Only Bayezid remained with the Janissaries. Surrounded, isolated, the last Ottoman defenders formed a final circle on Satol Hill, dominating the Chubuk Valley. They were perhaps 300 men, most wounded, all exhausted to limits no human being should know. And yet they continued fighting. Timur offered them surrender. Bayezid rejected it. The attacks continued throughout the afternoon. The Janissaries repelled each one, leaving mountains of Timurid corpses at their feet. But each repulse cost more lives that could not be replaced. The circle shrank, spears broke, swords dulled. When the sun began descending toward the horizon, Bayezid finally accepted the inevitable. He ordered a breakout charge. The remaining 300 men mounted their exhausted horses and charged toward the Timurid lines in one last act of defiance. Almost all of them died. Bayezid nearly escaped. His horse, a magnificent animal that had carried him through dozens of battles, took him out of the encirclement. For a few moments, it seemed the Thunderbolt would escape to fight another day. Then an arrow killed his horse. The Sultan fell to the ground, trapped beneath the dying animal. Before he could free himself, Timur's cavalry surrounded him. Bayezid I, the fourth Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, conqueror of the Balkans, terror of Europe, The man who had been on the verge of taking Constantinople was captured. He was the first Ottoman Sultan to be captured by an enemy. He would be the only one. What happened afterward became legend. The stories vary according to who tells them, embellished over the centuries until becoming myth more than history. What we know with certainty is that Bayezid was brought before Timur that same night, covered in dust and blood, chained like a common criminal. Western chronicles, written decades later by men who never witnessed the events, speak of terrible humiliations. They say Timur locked Bayezid in an iron cage and displayed it at his banquets. They say he used the fallen sultan as a footstool, resting his feet upon the back of the man who had once made Europe tremble. They say he forced Bayezid's wife Despina to serve wine naked before guests, while her husband watched helplessly from his cage. The chroniclers of Timur's court tell a different story. They say the conqueror initially treated Bayezid with respect as a fallen equal. They say they dined together, that they conversed about war and destiny. They say the cage was actually a covered litter used to transport the prisoner with some dignity. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere between both extremes. What we know is that the treatment worsened over time. After Bayezid attempted to escape, he was chained. Privileges were denied. Humiliation became part of his daily existence. Bayezid died in captivity on March 8, 1403, approximately 8 months after his capture. Some sources say he committed suicide by smashing his head against the bars of his cage. Others speak of apoplexy, a stroke caused by fury and humiliation. Others suggest he simply let himself die, refusing to eat, unable to bear the shame of his defeat. He was 43 years old. He had gone from being the most powerful man in the Islamic world to being a corpse in foreign land in less than a year. The consequences of the Battle of Ankara were cataclysmic for the Ottoman Empire. Timur restored all the Anatolian emirates that Bayezid had conquered, dividing Ottoman territory into fragments. Bayezid's sons faced each other in a brutal civil war that would last 11 years, a period known as the Ottoman Interregnum. Suleiman, Musa, Mehmed, and Isa fought among themselves with the same ferocity their father had shown against his external enemies. Constantinople, which had been on the verge of falling, gained another half-century of life. It would not be until 1453, under the reign of Mehmed II, Bayezid's grandson, that the city would finally fall to the Ottomans. Timur, for his part, did not fully capitalize on his victory. He sacked the Ottoman capital of Bursa, seized the Sultan's treasury, ravaged the coastal cities until reaching the Aegean, but he did not establish a permanent presence. His empire was an empire of conquest, not of administration. After devastating Anatolia for a year, he returned eastward, obsessed with his next objective, the conquest of China. He would never achieve it. Timur died in 1405 during the march toward China at 68 years of age. His empire fragmented almost immediately after his death, torn apart by the same succession wars that had destroyed the Ottomans. The final irony of Ankara is that neither of the two empires that fought there survived intact. The Ottomans eventually recovered, but it took them decades. The Timurids vanished forever as a dominant power, though their descendants would found the Mughal Empire in India. What remained was the legend, the story of the humiliated Thunderbolt, of the Sultan turned footstool, of the battle that proved no empire, however powerful it may seem, is invincible. Answer: the plain of Chubuk, where 140,000 men crushed 85,000. The wind still blows hot in the summers of July. No traces remain of the armies that fought there. There are no monuments. There are no tombs. Only the dry earth that once drank the blood of two empires. But the echo remains. The Battle of Ankara taught the world that arrogance has a price. That speed without prudence is suicide. That loyalty bought with the sword disappears when a bigger sword appears. Bayezid was the Thunderbolt, yes, but that night on the plains of Anatolia he discovered that even thunderbolts can be devoured by greater storms. The Ottomans never forgot the lesson. When they recovered, they did so with a caution Bayezid had never shown. They built a more methodical, more patient, more enduring empire. The ghost of Ankara lived in every decision of their later sultans, a reminder of what happens when pride clouds judgment. And somewhere in the archives of history, the name of Bayezid the Thunderbolt remains engraved alongside that of Timur the Lame, two monsters who met in a scorching summer of 1402. One destroyed the other. Both were consumed. By time, the wind blows over Ankara, the hills remain silent, and history remembers that when two empires collide, sometimes there is no victory, only different degrees of destruction, and ash, always ash.